Hi, welcome back, and we are back to join our squares. So hopefully you've finished making all the squares that you need for your project. For me, I'm using 56 squares, or I'm making a 7 by 8 square blanket. So this is how mine's starting to look out. I've already joined a lot of them, so I'm waiting to join the last row with you guys, and then I will join the first column with you guys, and then I need to weave in all of these ends because I did not weave them in as I went along. So just a heads up, I do highly recommend that. Alright, so this is my blanket. It's hard to get all on the screen. Let me back up just a little bit here so you can get a good idea. But there is the blanket. I have one more row to add up here, which I will do that in part with you. And then I need to go and join going down this way. And then I need to weave in all my ends. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to zoom you in, and we're going to do a whip join. And that's pretty much just sewing it together. So we're going to do a whip join together, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'll show you how I do it, which is very similar to how many other people do it. So I'm just folding this up so I can get closer access to what I am doing. So I'm going to show you the way that I am joining these particular squares. There are many ways that you can join. There's no right or wrong way. You just want to do what's most comfortable for you. So I am going to be joining with a white yarn into white. So it's sometimes harder to see that. Just know what I'm doing is very similar to sewing. So the first thing I need to do is get enough yarn, make sure I have enough yarn to do to sew these together. And how I make sure I have enough yarn, honestly, I run this along the length of my blanket 3 times, and then I snip. And usually that's actually a little more than enough, but I'd rather have more than enough than not enough. So that's 3 times, and I go ahead and feed the yarn through, and I'm using for my border, if I haven't told you guys yet, I'm pretty sure I have. I'm using Lion Brand Baby Soft yarn in white, and this is also DK weight, just like the Big Scoop yarn, the ice cream scoop yarn is. So it works out well. But let me go ahead and thread up my tapestry needle, and so what you're going to do is you're going to go through each stitch, and where there is a space, you're going to go through that once. So I start in the corner, and I just go ahead and pull the yarn all the way through until I have a little bit of a tail. I do not knot it, because I will be working that end in as I do the border. Okay, so, but I want a decent sized tail, but I don't want to make it too long. So that's a pretty decent sized tail right there, so I can weave it in, especially since there's no knot on this side. So next up, you want to go through the first stitch of your first shell, your first granny shell. You want to go under both, and I'm going to zoom this in a little bit more, I think. You want to go through both under, just like whenever you're doing, say, like a single crochet, you want to put your needle under both loops, and then you want to do that with the matching loop, the matching stitch, not loop, matching stitch on the other side. Make sure you hold on to your tail so that it doesn't get pulled, and then also make sure you go under, unless you want to make a knot right there, go under the back side, and then you just pull it through like you are sewing. And at the beginning this gets a little hairy because there's so much yarn, but as you go along you'll see where this gets you get into a rhythm of it. Okay, so I've got that held. I pulled that tight. You want to pull it tight without misshaping your, tight enough to hold but not so tight that you misshape your project. Okay, so now we're going to go into the second stitch of the granny square, the shell, granny shell, and then go through the corresponding stitch on the other one. And you want to still hold this. You need to hold it until you get finished with this stitch here. So continue to hold on to the tail, and I just lost. I gotta rethread this. Whoopsie. So rethread this real quick. Yay for the big-eyed needles. Those are linked down below if you like them. And then again, make sure you're going under so that you don't make a knot. You're just doing the stitch itself. Okay. And I'm going to link down below a really good tutorial showing you. It's by Moogly Blog. And she shows you with a gray square and using red, so you can really see it really well, how to do this type of join. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that together again, and we're going to go through the third stitch. And as you sew it, it gets pretty easy. You can just do it under one without searching for the stitch, because things start to line up really, really well. Okay, go under that the yarn that's behind, and then just continue to pull it. And you don't really need to hold this in that much anymore now that I have a few stitches. It's not going to pull this out. And then pull that tight, but not too tight to misshape. Now we're at the space, the chain space in the granny square. So we're at this section. So you just want to go through both of the chain spaces. Again, you want to go under the yarn here. Okay, and then pull this through, and I just unthreaded my needle again. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then I got to thread my needle again. Okay, and I'm going to go through this next section with you, but then just continue, and then I'll meet up with you where we join on the next square so you can see how that works out. Okay, so we just do one stitch in the chain space, so we're going into the next granny shell, and we're gonna thread through, send your tapestry needle under both loops on that first stitch of the second granny shell, and just go ahead and pull it through. And at first, like I said, it's going to take a little bit longer, and the more columns you have, the longer this needs to be. So pull that through, and now we're going to go from a second granny shell stitch to second granny shell stitch in the second cluster, I guess. Make sure you go under the yarn right there, so you're not going to continually be making knots that can affect how the blanket feels. So pull that through. Alright, and then we're in the last stitch of this particular shell, and we send it through both stitches, and just continue to pull this through. There you go. And then now we're at our second chain space here. Okay, and we're just going to do one stitch through there, so we're going to pull that through. So continue on to the end of this square, and then I will meet up with you at the end of this first square so that we can show I can show you how I join on the next square. Okay, so I will meet with you at the end of this square. Okay, welcome back, and I adjusted a little bit on my camera settings because it looked like with the time of day things were getting washed out a little bit, so I just wanted to make sure that you could see everything. So I am back, and I am at the end of this. I just need to put my last stitch through the corner, so again that's just one stitch through the corner. Okay, and just pull that all the way through. Alright, so now we're going to join the next square. Let me get that out of the way, and I apologize if these little ends I really should have fed in are getting in the way, but I will be, before we get to the end and start on the border, these will be fed in. Okay, so let me go ahead and grab my next square. Alright, so we've already fed through the corner here, so the next step is to go through, match up the corners on these ends, and then just adjust a little bit. And so we're just going to line those two up, and I'm going to feed this through. And okay, so I'm going to pull this real tight together, right? And then what I do is I hold this pretty tight while I'm feeding it through. I hold it tight so these stay together. And you don't have to hold it tight while you're trying to, when you first start the stitch, but then you pull it while you're, and you'll see what I'm doing here. So next up, I want to go through the first stitch of the first shell. And again, on the one that I'm tying it to, first stitch of the first shell. And now I'm going to pull this tight here while I am pulling this stitch through. Okay, so it stays together really tight. Alright, so now that's together pretty good, and let's go ahead and go through second stitch to second stitch. And pull through. Now before I let go of this and keeping, kind of holding them together, I'm going to do this last stitch, the third stitch of the shell through to the third stitch of the shell. And it looks like I probably did the second stitch to the first stitch. No big deal if you guys do that. Sometimes that'll happen. Just make sure you line it up as soon as you, sometimes you have to undo it if you've gone too many stitches and you're way off, but that was just one stitch that I did that with. So I did second stitch into first stitch. So what I'm gonna do is just make sure I catch up here and go third stitch into third stitch. You know, this kind of thing, it can be very forgiving as long as you catch it pretty early. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that stitch through right there. Okay, and now we are on to the space stitch, which we just do one stitch into the space stitch. And the first stitch of the second shell in that square set, and in that shell, and then the second shell, and into the first stitch of the second shell again, and then just make sure you're running under, oops, sorry for knocking the camera, running under there, and pull that all the way through. So just continue on like you did the first square all the way to the end, and then join your squares. Remember, holding this together while you're joining, and then go ahead and finish joining all of your squares in this row, and then I will meet up with you to and then actually just go ahead and join all your rows together, because I've already joined my rows. So finish this row and then continue on. And if you take a look, the way that I do my squares is I start to fold it like an accordion. So see how these are joined like this? All right, now I have it folded like an accordion, and see this one got, have it folded like an accordion here. Again, joined there, joined there, joined there. So that's the way that I join my squares, and how it works for me. However it works best for you, then go ahead and do it. Some people lay them all out on the table and kind of go through and join. But this, and again, this is just one way to join. This is the way I like to join these kind of squares. Another good way to join is a slip stitch across, and that does work well if you're laying it all out. But we're doing the whip stitch here, and again, I'm going to also link down below, because she has a really good tutorial on it, and she shows opposing colors so you can really see what's going on. But it's the Moogly Blogs doing a whip join, and I'll have that link down below, and of course I'll also link it up above so that you guys can get access to that if you need to see it, because I'm joining this blanket and it's the same color that I'm using across. I know that that's a little bit harder to see. Okay, welcome back, and I am at the end of this row, so I'm going to go ahead and do the last stitch. Since this is the last stitch of the row, then we want to go ahead and tie a knot at the end of this row, just to make sure that everything is secure. So you just tie a knot here, There we go. All right, so that is it for doing the rows. Now next we're gonna go ahead and do the columns. So let's go ahead and finish up all of your rows and then meet back with me here in just a moment so that we can start putting together the columns. Okay, welcome back. And now that you're finished sewing together all of your rows, now it's time to do your columns. Or when you turn it, they become rows again. But you're pretty much going to sew them together the same way as you did whenever you were doing the rows. So there's not much difference as far as that goes. Just want to feed this through. Now what I do is I make sure this is 3 times the length of the column, and before I start sewing. Now I leave at least that long of a tail. It's hard to see against the white, I know, but at least that long of a tail so that I can feed it in, you know, feed in my ends. And then you just want to go, you start in the corner and then you want to go stitch to stitch, matching the stitches. Now it starts out a little cumbersome because you have such a long piece that you're working with. Uh-oh. I pulled on the wrong one. So I want to hang on to this piece here while I feed in, pull this all the way through and tighten that in. Alright, and then you know, again you go stitch to stitch as you sew these pieces in. Okay, and then just like, let's see here, stitch to stitch. So we're we're going underneath the top stitch of the double crochet, the top of the double crochet on both squares, and then feeding everything through. Sometimes whenever you get one this long, they tend to like to knot up. So just be careful of that and work out any knots as they come up. Okay, so finish pulling that through. There's another knot. Just make sure you don't tighten them up. There we go. All right. So here, if you take a look at this, I've got this, here we go. I've got this running inside, and that would actually place a knot there if I don't pull this through this loop. So I need to do that really quick. You just want to be careful to try and not create knots where they're not necessary. I mean, they would make the item more secure. However, it can make bumps where they're not needed. Okay, so that's why it's important to always go over this back piece that you're working over. Now, again, just like we did the other way, and your chains, your single chains is spaces, then you're just gonna do one whip stitch here, and then you start going stitch to stitch again. Make sure you go in front of the yarn. Okay, and just continue on, and I will meet up with you again right when we get to this corner. So welcome back. We are right here at the end of this. So I went ahead and I went from this corner. I'm going to show you with my needle. So I went from this corner to this corner with my whip. Now I'm going to go from this corner to this corner, but I'm going to hold on to this so I can keep it pretty tight, because we're going in and joining the corners, and this will make up for any slack that happened from this line of joint. So pull that up as I make sure that's tight here. There we go. And then pull that through and make that just as tight, so make sure that all these corners are very securely together. And now, just like before, I'm going to hold that to keep that tight. I'm going to go from stitch to stitch, so to make sure everything is even, I'm going to go through stitch to stitch while I hold on this, because I want to keep it secure. Since we're at a joint section, it's easy to let that get loose. And see how I have it, it's wanting to knot. I went the wrong way when I went over the thing, but that's okay, it's easy enough to fix. I'm sorry, I got a dog scratching, so you're hearing their collar as they're scratching there, so I apologize about that. But so I've got this held tight here as I bring in and cinch up this first stitch on these two squares. So there we go. That is nice and secure right there, right? Okay, so we're going to go ahead. I want you to go ahead and finish this row, and I will meet up with you at the very end. Welcome back, and we are at the end of joining the first column, and just like we did at the end of joining the row, you have the turning chains, the last two there. So we're just going to join in there and then intentionally make a knot right there. There you go. And then that is it for joining that column. And here you go. Okay, so that is joined. So go ahead and do the same thing to the rest of your columns, and then we will meet up at the very end to tie this off together, and then we're going to start the border round. So I will see you then.